Bienvenue, welcome back to Millennial Mental Health Channel. It is nice to have you here. Pardon the terrible French accent. Eddie, I want to have an icebreaker, a classic icebreaker question. If you could
Two
have
truths
dinner
and a lie.
with...
Oh, okay. Never mind.
No, that's actually not a bad one. Yeah, let's actually do that. Give me two truths.
No. Go back to your other one because I'm terrible at that one.
Okay, dinner with anyone in history, or dead or alive. Who would you have dinner with?
Oh God,
I know that's a tough one.
Because I'm going to say like something super lame, like a professional athlete or something that makes me seem like such a like loser that I only care about sports. I don't know, man. Oh man, this is bad. You're gonna have to cut a lot of thinking. Dead or alive in history.
Sebastian Janikowski or
the Polish cannon.
For those of you who don't know, the Raiders kicker for years and years and years. He had a
first
leg.
Round draft pick. Yeah, he was like our leading scorer. Yeah, dude, like he was amazing for a long time. Yeah, him and Shane Leckler. Okay. God, this is so bad. Okay, first thing that popped into my mind because I'm about to get his book, and now I have to look it up to pronounce it correctly because he has a Greek last name. He's the author of, that I've been telling you, The Silent Patient and then The Maidens.
Yeah.
He just came out with a book called The Fury. It's another like thriller. So his name is Alex Michaelides. Let's do him because his first two books, the main character is a therapist, and like those were like, I think those, it took a little bit, but those set me on the trajectory to get back into reading for fun. So let's do that.
Cool.
That'll be, and his news book just came out yesterday, and it should be getting delivered to my house in the next day or so.
Sweet.
Pending the ice situation. Shout out to my sister because she got it to me for my birthday.
Nice. Yeah, Eddie and the city of Portland has been in shutdown because it has been frosty.
Frosty. And not the snowman kind. It has just been frozen roads.
Yeah, just
your
the
turn,
slick roads.
It took up a lot of time.
I've always, the answer to my question has always been Jim Carrey. Like I've always really wanted to have, but I was thinking about it I actually would really like to have dinner with my paternal grandfather, who I never got to meet because he passed away before I was born. But it sounds like we are similar in a lot of ways, and he sounds like he was an awesome dude, former teacher and principal. So yeah, I would say I would like to meet family that I've never gotten to meet before. Or honestly, Sebastian Janikowski would be a good one for me too.
Oh, yeah, way better answer than me. All right.
So today we are talking police. We are talking mental health issues. I'm sure a lot of you guys out there have heard about Defund the Police, and that was a pretty big movement. Give me 1 second. My dog is whining at me to feed her, so I'm going to get her out of here. 1 second.
Sounds good.
Let's go, Freckles. Didn't want that on the recording. All right. 3, 2, 1. And honestly, there's been a lot of stories that have made us kind of mad of police hurting people with mental health and police potentially even killing people with mental health too. But I think it's really important to try and see both sides of this argument too and understand how difficult it is for police to deal with these situations. So we understand that police do have a hard job, but sometimes they are trained to jump to violence instead of de-escalation tactics. So we wanted to look at the evidence and see if there's a better way to police, what other people are doing, and give you a little bit of the history and background of this issue. Eddie, story time. Have you had any run-ins with the police? And if so, how were you treated?
When I was getting ready for today, I looked at the question. And I can probably start off with like most of my interactions have been like fine, like nothing like out of the ordinary. But the one that does come up, and one that actually my dad brought up when I was home for Christmas, was one time we were driving up from the Bay Area up to Oregon to visit schools, and he got pulled over. He was probably speeding, so that was his problem or his fault. But got pulled over in like Northern California, like not a lot of people that look like me or my dad. And when we're getting pulled over, like the guy was talking to my dad, blah, blah, blah. And my dad's like, oh yeah, it's a rental car and all this. At some point, the guy like looks at my dad's like ID and was like, oh, this guy doesn't look like you. And my dad's like, what the fuck? Like, that's my ID. And then he started like questioning him, like, oh, where do you live? And my dad's like reciting everything. And at one point asked my dad if he had like a nose job. It was just like being like an ass about it too. It was like really like just being a douche. And yeah, like basically like mistreating my dad in front of me while I'm like 17, 18, not really knowing what to do, of just like harassing him, of like saying he doesn't believe that was him in the license. And then I think ultimately what happened was when he wrote him a ticket, he made my dad give him fingerprints to basically say like, okay, if we send this ticket to the person you claim you are and the real person gets the ticket and is like, that's not me, then we at least have the fingerprints to be like, oh, that they can like prove that it's not them.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've never heard of anything like that. That's wild.
Yeah. Me either. So it's like, at the time I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, that's really the one that like sticks out. Like all the other times have been fine. I've gotten my fair share of tickets, but like, yeah, that was really one that stood out. And I remember one time I was I got called for jury duty, and I made it to like the top whatever where you have to like answer questions. And I remember talking about that, and part of me thinks that sharing that story got me disqualified from being on the jury, but it was the truth. So yeah, the
truth shall set you free and get you out of jury duty.
Yes, sir. What about you?
Most of my interactions with the police haven't been that great either. Mostly they've been pretty rude and unfair to me. So I've got a little bit of a bias against the police, I will have to admit. One time I got a speeding ticket, and I was going 83 in a 75. I was on the interstate, and the cop was like, caught you going 93. And I was like, I was going to 83. I'll admit to that. And he's like, whatever. And handed me a ticket. I'm like, dude, unbelievable that he can just lie and make up whatever he wants, and give me a ticket. And of course, like I wasn't going to come back I was in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. I was driving through, going back home. It's like, I'm not coming back and going to court in this podunk little town. So, and of course I paid the ticket and it said, by paying this, you admit that you were at fault and you did everything. I was like, oh, come on. Like, I just hate that system.
I know.
And then once when I was living in Seattle in medical school, my buddies and I were playing video games. We're playing Diablo 3, excellent game. And we heard a bang, bang, bang on the front door, and it was the cops. And they're like, we're looking for someone in your apartment complex. Like, can we search your place? And we're like, sure. I mean, we're just chilling there playing video games. They pulled their guns and swept our place. And we were like, what the hell's going on? And then they came back to us. They had us sit on the couch, 3 dudes on one couch just sitting there like terrified. Like, what is happening? And they're like, we saw someone in your window. And we're like, we're just playing video games. Like, I don't know like what you saw, but it was just us in here. And they're like, don't effing lie to us. And it was just like, we're not. And then they just left. Like, no apology, no thanks for your help, just left. And then the next day we left our apartment and there was blood everywhere. So there was just like blood smeared all over the walls, all over the pavement. So we never really got the full story, but apparently someone like broke a window or tried to get into the apartment complex and was bleeding and just, felt free to smear their blood all over the place. So they were trying to keep people safe, but they were also being douches about it. So, it's kind of a plus minus. And I always think about that, police have always been generally kind of rude to me, and I'm white. And studies show that typically white people get treated by police better than people of color. So I'm like, if they're treating me like garbage, what are they treating everyone else like?
Spoiler, not well.
Yeah, that was a pretty solid spoiler alert there. Yeah.
Well, Justin, I know you did a lot of deep diving and got a lot of historical information for us, and a lot of it was new for me, and like it helped like connect some dots. So give us the stuff, give us the info, and let's share some history and some information with the listeners.
Yeah, you want to put on a cheesy English accent and talk about a history minute. Today we have something. There's something very important for you. It's something called deinstitutionalization. But this is something that is actually super important to both politics and mental health in this country. And I thought it was fascinating that I had never heard about this until I got into the world of mental health and psychiatry. I feel like everyone should know that this happened in our history. But the government used to fund mental health asylums and sanitariums. This was a really common practice, and mostly it was like federal government giving money for these facilities. And you see them in movies. We don't really have many left. This is where people who were mentally ill would go to get their needs met, or get medicine if they needed it, have a place to live. But asylums weren't perfect. There's lots of stories of people being abused, not having their rights. So it's not a great system, but it at least gave people a place to go and gave people a place to go get help. Then in the 1960s, the U.S. started to get rid of asylums for primarily three reasons. They wanted to reintegrate people with society. This was kind of along the lines of the civil rights movement. They wanted everyone was supposed to be equal and in the same playing field. Reason number two is that antipsychotic medications were starting to come out and seem to be effective. So they thought, okay, they don't need to be in an asylum. Maybe we can treat them at home in their community. And then number three, of course, as everything in this country, to save money. They closed a lot of these asylums it's for the cash, baby. Because asylums were expensive and the severely mentally ill weren't necessarily rolling in the dough. Mm-hmm. So essentially, the government started shutting down the asylums and said that it was going to put money into community mental health problems to catch all the people falling out of the asylums. And that did not happen. They did not fund the community mental health system properly. And it led to people with severe mental illness being kicked out onto the streets, out of the asylums, having nowhere really to go and having to figure it out on their own, which also led to a massive increase in homelessness.
So then you have all that happening. What happened? Who was supposed to help, or who was supposed to, I guess, take over for the job that the asylums did? You might have been able to piece it together based off of what we said the episode is about, but the criminal justice system. And as we've seen I think especially, this is like anecdotal, but let's like just say the last like 7-8 years has just been amplified because of things like social media and being able to have our news like at our fingertips. A lot of this has been amplified and seeing like, this is not okay that it's been like this for the last 60 plus years after like asylum started to close down. In America, the correction system has become the largest provider of mental health services. I know for me, when I worked at the juvenile department, when we would have teams go to like the higher, like basically to correction, so they'd go to teenage or young adult jail. A lot of the time, thankfully, they were able to get into like programs or get treatment. But that's not always the best. Like, it's not always the best for it to be mixed, right? To be integrated into like, I'm locked up and I'm in treatment. It might be better if I was in treatment and like living somewhere else, but still getting help and support. I also think of like when I worked, it was like a 6 or 7 month period. I worked in an adult residential kind of play. It was like the in between for people either going to prison or returning from prison and then reintegrating back into the community. And I was there for a while, working as like, I was a community corrections specialist. And really what it was, I would walk down the halls into the dorms and the pods and just checking on everybody, making sure they're okay, take them out for their break, all that stuff. I was just making sure they were following rules. And same thing, like a lot of them had treatment while they were in there. I feel like that setting I liked a little bit more because at least like the way that it was structured was if you had a job, if you had things to do, you were able to leave. You needed permission beforehand, but you're still able to like engage in those like community things. So I felt like that combination was a little better with like, you live in the community, you get to engage in the community and you get treatment. Whereas if you're in prison and you're getting treatment, just something about that feels icky. I don't have a good word for it. It just feels like, are you really getting the most out of it if like you're learning all these things, you're getting help, and then you're thrown back into a cell for large chunk of your day.
Yeah, and I had a couple of friends who would moonlight at the adult prison in Omaha, and they didn't have access to the same resources. They didn't have all the different types of therapies. The medicines that they were able to use were limited too. So using the corrections as the primary way of treating people's mental health in this country may not be the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert again.
Spoiler alert.
Continuing on with history and stats and facts. It's estimated that about 16% of the prison population has a severe and persistent mental illness. The American Medical Association estimates that about 400,000 people with severe mental illness are behind bars in the U.S. I think of what am I trying to say? Trauma. That's the big thing that popped up. Traumatic experience, as we've talked about for a long time, it does not always lead to mental health issues, but it's kind of a precursor to a lot of people who are diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness have some type of traumatic experience. So I think it makes sense that so many people in 16% is a lot. If you think about the rates of depression or anxiety, it's not that high, but 16% is huge of the population. Yeah. That's a lot.
In the clinic that I did in Omaha, we saw a lot of people with SPMI, severe and persistent mental illness. That's bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, all that stuff. And so many of them had episodes of being homeless. And so many people told me oh yeah, I was given tickets for disturbing the peace, for drug and alcohol related charges, for trespassing, because they had nowhere to go. And so they were trying to find places to go. All these little things would add up. And almost every single homeless person would end up in prison at some point, especially the ones with the mental health issues too. So, man, the homeless problem is multifactorial. There's multiple things going on that's contributing to it. But I think a big reason why it is such a huge problem, and in the United States it's a really big problem, is because the severely mentally ill are not supported in this country. They do not have the resources. They do not have a place to go. And that's why a lot of the people that you see that are homeless on the streets are talking to themselves, are having auditory hallucinations, because, they don't have the support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you think of we've talked about when people have a psychotic episode or they're having schizophrenia, whatever it is, we've talked about how much correct medication and support, it doesn't make it go away, but it makes it manageable to where you can live a life, and you can live I'm not even going to say normal, you can live a regular standard life. But we don't give people these opportunities. And I guess you said, it's multifactorial. We can complain about this and that, but there's going to be something else for what about this? There's no correct answer. I'll stop myself before I just keep rambling. But if basic needs given to people, I think you'll see a lot of issues that people have with the streets and what they see out in cities. I think a lot of those start to go away when those basic needs get met.
Mm-hmm. So cops have to deal with this, and oftentimes cops are the ones interacting with the people on the streets, the people with mental health crises, and sometimes these people are treated like criminals because that's what the cops are used to treating people like. And sometimes people with SPMI, severe persistent mental illness, can act strangely or behave strangely in unpredictable ways, which makes cops really nervous and uneasy. And unfortunately, there are lots of stories about people who are psychotic and the police try and help, and then they get really, really paranoid. They might grab a knife or a weapon, and the cops have to react to protect themselves. It's just a terrible system where the people who need the help are getting hurt by the people who are supposed to be helping. And then the people who are supposed to be helping can also be hurt by the people they're supposed to be helping too. So it's just, it's a bad cycle. And it just seems that cops in emergency rooms and hospitals and even Eddie and I were talking before the show, libraries have to deal with a lot of the failures of society to take care of the people that need the most support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of things end up falling on the public entities. So when we talked earlier and we were talking about libraries, I started going to the library more frequently over the last year. And I noticed there's a lot of homeless people or houseless people who will go to the library to access certain things. And it makes sense. The library is open from 10 o'clock to whatever time at night. It's a place you can go. You're outside. You're not outside anymore. You're away from the elements. You can use the internet. There's like limitless entertainment in the library if you read and do, you know what I mean? Like it gives you a place where you don't have to be sitting outside out in the different, especially like now where it's really snowy right now here and really cold in the Portland metro area. You can avoid places like that. Like why wouldn't someone take advantage of that? Why wouldn't they go and use those resources? The unfortunate part is that because of the way our society is structured, like that falls onto public entities instead of like places that can actually like offer up treatment and help. How do we get that? I don't know. That's where I'm lost, but
maybe defund the police. So that's kind of the argument, is that shifting the money from policing people to supporting other people might be the answer. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. And we want to shift the conversation, because defund the police got a lot of negative vitriol, and there was turned into kind of a negative thing and a political tool. But our ultimate goal is to try and see if we can talk about evidence-based ways to have mental health be better treated by society, be better treated by police, and maybe even better crisis response teams too. So we found an article from the Associated Press, which we will put in the show notes. And 14 out of the 20 largest cities in the United States now have teams that they call civilian, alternative, or non-police response teams. And this article actually mentions a young man named Christian Glass, who was in Colorado, who was having a mental health crisis. And on top of having a mental health crisis, he got his car stuck in the snow. He called police for help, and the officers responded. And then they had body cam footage of this, and it showed that the young man thought that the police were, and quote, supernatural beings that were after him. And so this sounds to me like he was having a psychotic break, or having at least psychotic symptoms. So he wouldn't get out of the car. So the police eventually broke in his window and then ended up shooting him to death after he grabbed a small knife to defend himself. So he called them to help him get out of the snow, and it ended up him dying, getting shot to death, which is a tragedy. What a horrible thing to happen. So yeah, just an idea of some of the stories that can happen to people who call for help, and it ends in tragedy.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about the idea of like defund the police. And I think a lot of things we talk about in life have some type of like spectrum of like, what is one side thinking? And this is like, when I'm talking about this, I'm not even talking about, maybe it's a little bit political, but when I talk about like the idea of like defunding the police, I've heard a lot of different like sides of it. If you just look at the part of defunding the police, I feel like on one side is like, defund to like use money in other spaces for other types of support and help for the public. And then there's like other side of it who are like completely like, no, we don't need police at all, and like completely wipe out the police. And I feel like, I don't have numbers or stuff off of the top of my head, but I feel like any extreme is going to be difficult to like achieve. And I feel like it ultimately, because of the way that society is structured, and because of the way that like police and the criminal justice system and all of that is like integrated into our society, like it's hard to come up with a plan of just like, right now, starting tomorrow, no longer will there be police enforcement. So I don't know, I guess I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, and maybe I'm not making a whole lot of sense, but just like, that's my thought of like, most likely the correct answer, or the answer that positively impacts the most people, is probably somewhere in the middle, probably somewhere that takes into account all perspectives on it.
I think you're absolutely right. It can't be a black and white thing, and just completely getting rid of police altogether is probably not going to work either. But as of 2023, governments were funding $123 million towards these non-police response teams. One of the biggest ones was the STAR program in Denver, Colorado. Another big one was the Be Heard program in New York City. And there's one in Portland too, right, Eddie?
Yeah, I'll tell you all about it. I'll let you finish with Denver's, and then I'll talk to you about the Portland one.
So these programs, or at least the one in Denver, sends unarmed support workers to mental health crises to offer support, resources, de-escalation, and even sometimes food. In the Denver one I was reading about, they're like, we bring Cheez-Its because it helps people calm down. Offering food is just a good way to connect and communicate with people. So Stanford was actually studying Denver's STAR program, and it showed that crime rates actually dropped 34% where this program was operating. And they think it's because people weren't being taken to jail. People weren't getting arrested as much by the police when calling for help. They were given resources to help them like get out of certain cycles, help them not reoffend. So there are good things that may come out of these programs.
Yeah. So similarly, Portland has what's called the Portland Street Response. Same thing. It started in, I believe, 2021. So we're going into like the third year of it being around. And I know when the pilot program came out, relatively speaking, it was pretty small. I think their hours were pretty small. I don't even know if they were working 7 days a week, but now I think they're starting to hopefully expand to be like a 24/7 thing to be available. Yeah, and the interesting thing with Portland Street Response is that they partnered with the Portland Fire Department. And this is something I just learned today, getting ready for the episode. I assumed that it was like with, the county sheriffs or with the police department, but they partnered with the fire department. So what Portland State University was studying, like how the first couple of years have gone, what they found is that an estimated 97% of Portland Street Response calls would have traditionally been required a police response. So they were able to take those calls that they were getting, basically all of them except three, or all of them except 3%, before would have sent out to a police officer, but now they didn't have to do that. So in total, Portland Street Response reduced Portland police officers' annual call load by almost 4%, which I think is probably a pretty big number. More specifically, the numbers show a 19% drop in police needing to respond to 911 calls characterized as either welfare checks or unwanted person situations where callers were concerned about someone else, about their well-being, or about wanting someone removed from the area. So basically, like anything that was welfare, or this person maybe on the street is talking to themselves or acting what someone would classify as erratic, instead of a police officer having to come, they send out Portland Street Response with the fire department, and they're able to handle it, which I think is good, and it's positive. Like you were mentioning with the Cheez-Its, they also mentioned of just being able to provide like food, resources. I think in one of them, I read 2 articles. In one of the articles, I think it even said like 4% of the people that they talked to, they were able to actually help with permanent housing, whereas the others, they were able to help with other like resources. And maybe not everyone got permanent, but they're able to help with something. Portland Street Response work also lessened the burden on local hospitals. So in the year period that they looked at, only 2.5% of all Portland Street Response calls ended with a client needing to be taken to the emergency department.
Whoa.
So some good numbers. And I want to throw this out there. Yeah, huge deal. Because we talked off the recording right before, where like emergency department is like, well, I guess, if you're hungry, all right, let's take you to the emergency department. Like, get your sandwich, get your Gatorade, whatever it is. And it's not always the best use of an emergency department. Like, people need help. People need medical support. And if one of the beds or things are being used by someone who could probably be better served somewhere else, that overall, that's the better way to go about it. So one of the things that I thought was interesting and what I read was that the first year that Portland Street Response was out and was a thing, they were funded partially by a defunding of the Portland police. So taking away some of their budget and using it for Portland Street Response came up with this. So some might say that's a good reason to maybe we can reallocate some money. Maybe we can, and it doesn't have to all be the police, but maybe there is a place where we can start to reallocate some funds here and there, or maybe the federal government could be better at allocating funds towards things like that instead of fill in the blank here. So just some food for thought.
Yeah. And I know we talked in the past about how after 9/11, there was a large militarization of the police, and police budgets really expanded and blew up, and they spent it on military equipment. And it would be nice if we did less of that and more of putting that money into public services.
Yeah.
Yeah, teams like this. And so it sounds like these programs can be a way for reducing violent interactions between police and the mentally ill, but these programs are still young and they have not been studied thoroughly. So to date, there are no major studies giving us any hard data on how effective these programs are at a variety of outcomes. We know that they, like Eddie mentioned, we've got little snippets of data, things that they help with, but we don't have like big, sweeping, overwhelming, like, yes, these programs work, we got to implement them. Plus, all these different programs are different city to city too. So it's also hard to study them because they're not consistent between the different programs. So it's hard to know what are the active ingredients that actively help in these programs too.
It ends up just being like, if you do a city by city, it ends up just being like a case study, and then you can like look at things that like fit here or there. But like each city's needs are drastically different. To your point of the programs being young, like Portland Street Response isn't even 3 years old. Like, it wouldn't even be able to go to kindergarten. Like, it's that young, right? Like, it's that brand new. And like, part of it is like, damn it, why do we have to wait so long for these things to happen? The other part of it is like, well, at least something's happening now. And then the other part of it is like, yeah, but still, we should have done this shit earlier, damn it. Because then we could at least look at data and make some educated decisions, like have some data to back up, like, look, when we use this money for this, or when we have this much resource for this, this is what we're able to do. So hopefully in the near future, we'll move towards that.
Yeah. So one question I wanted to ask too, and one thing I wanted to research for this episode was, does having more cops actually help anything? And the short answer is, and I was surprised by this, yes. There was a really good systematic review done by the economist Morgan Williams out of New York University, NYU, that showed that adding 10 to 17 cops to a police force actually prevents about 1 homicide per year. So more cops, especially in high crime areas, does tend to translate to less victim crimes like robbery, rape, and aggravated assault. The study also showed that adding more cops leads to increases in arrest for victimless crimes like disorderly conduct, drinking in public, drug possession, and loitering. They didn't mention public urination, but I think I'm going to get hit for that one day. And then Black people were disproportionately impacted by these types of arrests. So more police, more Black people getting arrested for victimless crimes.
We've talked about it in the past, but things like adding cops to schools after Columbine has been shown to add no protective benefits, but led to people of color getting more tickets and in trouble with the police. Basically, if you put in a police officer in a place where there's not normally a police officer, there's a higher chance, unfortunately, for people of color to be disproportionately impacted and negatively impacted. And I think, the conversation we've had today, for me, I've had to do a lot of thinking when you first sent me the show notes, and then earlier today before we recorded, of like, one of my best friends is in law enforcement, and like, we have a great school resource officer at my school. But just because those two things are true does not mean that like there can't be room for growth. It also doesn't mean that like everything is bad with the system. I think, like I said earlier, like it's probably somewhere in the middle that best fits our society. I mean, I think there's so many things that have just been so ingrained and intertwined into our society that it's, I don't want to say impossible, but really hard to go back from or move away from. So it's like, okay, how do we do the best with what we got now? And how do we make sure we are treating everyone fairly, taking care of each other, taking care of other people? Like, there's so much. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And some stats on cops. There are about 324,951 police officers in the United States. It's 17% female, 83% male. So it is a bit of a sausage party, if you ask me. And it's 60% white, 18% Latinx, and 13% Black. So it's kind of what you expect. But I bring that up to say that I think it would be better to have more women police officers. I think that could be something that could help a lot. Not to say that women can't be violent, but it does seem like they are better at connecting with people, de-escalation, and perhaps we just got too many men on the force. Who knows? That's just conjecture from me. And let's do one discussion question here at the end, Eddie. What do you think? Should cops have guns?
Oh, I knew this was going to be the one. I don't know, because you look at, we talked earlier too before we recorded of like, what do other countries do? But I think the thing is that like other countries, their history is so different with criminal justice and with law enforcement that like they can do different things. Right? You were mentioning a country that like the police don't even have guns, so it's like, it feels like in right now, like, is that really a thing we can move away from? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. I'm gonna go to I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a very emotionally mature response. It's okay to say I don't know.
Yeah.
My wife and I were recently watching a show on Netflix called Fool Me Once, which was pretty good, and it was set in the United Kingdom, in I think in and around London, and we thought it was so funny. There was a dangerous scene where a cop's about to enter a situation, and I'm like, oh, he's going to pull his gun, and instead he pulls out like a telescoping baton. I was like, what is he going to do with that? It's just the most non-intimidating, especially in the American mindset of like guns, 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 guns. Every movie's got guns. Every show's got guns. I was just so weird to be like, he's got a baton.
Yeah.
All right, here it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. The cat's out of the bag. There are already so many guns in America. You know, we have more guns per capita than any other country by far, that cops kind of need guns to protect themselves and to protect other people. So I know a lot of people argue that point of like, take away the guns, that'll help. But I would say maybe that wouldn't help and just put people in more risk and danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think one thing to say with today's episode of like, this is like, you know, people say like, this is just scratching the surface. I don't even know if it's scratching the surface. There's like so much other, like, we could go for hours if we wanted to, but I think we really enjoy to have our episodes to be about 45 minutes long. So we're definitely not going to go for hours. But there's just so much. I think the biggest thing is, one thing I'm taking away from today is it's made me think. It's made me look into like things around me and like Portland street response. I've heard of it. I'm aware of it. I know about it. Didn't know the numbers. So I think for me, it was really good to learn that and to get to hear that. And to really just think, like to have a discussion with my own self of like, what are the possibilities? What can be done better? Like what is there? How did, like the whole thing about the history you said of asylums and those closing down, didn't even know that, didn't even piece that together. Like that's such useful information to have. So I think my takeaway is this is just 40 minutes of the start. It's not enough of a conversation.
Yeah.
There definitely has to be more, but I think hopefully it helps you all think a little more, just like it helped me think a lot more today.
Yeah, I think you have a great point. I'm glad we were able to talk a little bit about the history. And I think that's something I want to start doing on the show a little bit more, is addressing how messed up that we are because of the things that have happened in the past, and how, you know, psychiatry and mental health doesn't have the most stellar history in the world. They've done some really horrible things to people too. Yeah. So we're going to dive into that in future episodes.
Yeah.
But I would say my big take home point for today is cops have a hard job. And I recently read a book called The Best Minds, where it talks a lot about people who have psychotic breaks. And there was an instance in a story, and this was a true story, where there was a woman who was having a psychotic break, and she charged the police with a knife, and one of the officers shot the woman and killed her. And this officer received a ton of hate and hate mail. This was back in, I think, the 70s. For doing that when he was protecting himself and protecting his partner in a very dangerous situation, and the mental health community skewered that police officer for it. So I think no matter what, we gotta have some understanding. We gotta have some peace and some acknowledgement that police have a very hard job. And sometimes they don't know how to react. Sometimes they have to make split-second decisions. And if we can support the cops or train them in another way, or give them support teams to be able to respond to some of those calls so they don't have to do it as much, I think we need to consider those options for society as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if it's something that we already have in our society, and if it's something that's probably not going away, then how do we make them, or how do we get them to a spot where they can do their jobs better, or what improvements can some people make? Yeah.
All right, my man. Play us out.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode. On social media, you can find us at MillennialMHC, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. I skipped the first part. I'll do it now. You can find our episode wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Feel free to leave us a 5-star review. One brand new thing you can now check out, www.millennialmhc.com, just like our tag for our social media. You don't even need the www. You can skip that. You can just type millennialmhc.com. Check out our new website. Check out our new blog that we're starting off. We're going to write a little bit in between episodes, just things we think of, things we want to share with you all. We think it looks pretty, so feel free to check it out. Let us know what you think. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for everything. And as always, take care of y'all mentals.